Section 8.1, we will be discussing monomials. So what is a monomial? A monomial is a number, a variable, or a product of a number and one or more variables. An expression that involves the division of variables is not a monomial. So in other words, something like 3x squared is an example of a monomial, but something like x divided by y is not a monomial. Okay, so in order to do this section, we should remember what it means to raise a number or a variable to a power. So let's recall that if we have x to the fourth, that means x times x times x times x. Okay, and I think we probably all know that. But what if we have x raised to the negative fourth power? What does that mean? The important thing to realize is that whenever we have something that's raised to a negative power, that's the same thing as 1 over that number or variable raised to the positive power. So in other words, x to the negative fourth would equal 1 over x to the fourth. So if we wanted to then write that expression, that would be the same as 1 over x times x times x times x. Okay, so one of the things you'll be asked to do on tonight's homework is to take things that are raised to a negative power and rewrite the monomial so that it is now raised to a positive power. So that's what we did with this last example. We took x to the negative fourth and changed it into 1 over x to the fourth. So just to show some more examples of this, if we had, say, 3x to the negative second over y squared, how could we rewrite that having all positive exponents and no negative exponents? Okay, well, just like what we did in the previous example, if we put this x to the negative fourth down in the denominator, it became a positive. So that's what we're also going to do with x to the negative second. If we put this variable down in the denominator, then we can make the power positive. So let's rewrite this, and 3 can stay where it is, the y squared can stay where it is, but the x to the negative second we're going to take and put down in the denominator, and then it will become simply x to the second. So if you're going to try to rewrite a monomial with all positive powers, what you have to remember is if it's raised to a positive power, you leave it where it is. If it's raised to a negative power, you move it. Okay, so let's write that rule down. If it's raised to a positive power, leave it where it is. If it's raised to a negative power, move it. So if we take a look at a couple more examples here, if I have, let's see, 6 to the negative second power, x squared, y to the negative third, okay, and I want to rewrite that with all positive exponents, I look at everything individually. Okay, so first of all, I have 6 to the negative second. I'm going to go ahead and now move that down into the denominator, and it will become 6 to the second in the denominator. Okay, I look at the x squared that's on top. It already is a positive power, so I leave it where it is. Then I look at the denominator and I have y to the negative third. Because it's a negative power, I'm going to move it up into the numerator. So it will be y to the third. Okay, so basically if you have a negative power and it's in the numerator, move it into the denominator and make it positive. If it's in the denominator and it's a negative power, move it into the numerator and make it positive. If it's already a positive power, leave it where it is. One more example with this. A squared b to the negative second, c to the third, over d to the fourth, e to the negative ninth. Okay, so let's try this one. A squared, that's a positive power, I leave it in the numerator. B squared, that is b to the negative second, excuse me. That's a negative power, so it moves down into the denominator. C to the third, that's positive, it stays where it is. D to the fourth, it's also positive, so it stays where it is. E to the negative ninth, it's negative, so it moves up into the numerator. Okay, and after I move it, then all the powers are positive. So that's what most of the homework will be like tonight. It will be just asking you to rewrite the expression with all positive powers. The only other thing that's also in the homework is we have to recall what it means when a number or a variable is raised to the 0 power. Okay, if it's raised to the 0 power, that's equal to 1. So anything a to the 0 raised, would be 1. X to the 0 power would be 1. 500 to the 0 power would be 1. So that's pretty easy. The only thing that's a little bit confusing is what if the number is negative and then we raise it to the 0 power? Well, what we have to recall is order of operations in this case. So in other words, if I had negative 3 to the 0 power, order of operations would tell me that I would take care of the exponent first. So I would raise 3 to the 0 power, get 1, and then I would have to make it negative after that. So negative 3 to the 0 power is equal to negative 1. It sounds simple enough, but then we also have to be careful whether or not there's parentheses around the number. So, in other words, if I had negative 3 inside parentheses raised to the 0 power, then order of operations would tell me number is negative 3, and then I raise it to the 0 power. Well, then anything raised to the 0 power is 1, so it would be a positive 1. So you have to be careful of where the negative sign is. If the negative sign is inside parentheses and then you raise that whole thing to a power, the answer is a positive 1. If there's no parentheses, then you raise the number to the 0 power, make it 1, and then take care of the negative sign so it becomes negative 1. So that's a little bit confusing. We'll go over that just a little bit more in class, but kind of be aware of that. So the first ones start off like these, where they're raising numbers to the 0 power, but it will always be either 1 or negative 1 for the answer. And then the rest of the homework tonight is like this example, where you're going to change an expression into all positive powers. So that's it.